All right, guys. Today I'm with two guests who are going to show you guys how to make real money. We're not just talking six figures, we're talking high six figures, seven figures, that life changing money that'll put you in the top 1% of those of the earners in the US or worldwide. And so today I'm joined by Nick Howard and Paul Gunnis. Nick's the CEO of Stacks and Poker Dominion. Stacks is a private game agency built to protect the recreational experience and support game runners. Poker Dominion is the pro division focused on training players, that could be you, to reach high stakes online, then helping them transition into bigger games. Paul's played more private poker than almost anyone in Vegas over the last 2 years. He works with Stacks to help pros not just get into these games, but actually stay in them. So Nick and I connected through Stacks. We shared a vision for moving the game forward, especially around helping pros level up and making poker better overall. Let's start with how this project came to life. I'd like to also mention I feel like we connected on making the experience better for the VIPs, the recreational players. I think that's important. These guys who are into business and finding something in it for them to win as well. And
100%. Definitely became two sides of the same coin, which is hopefully what we'll be able to connect for the audience here. First off, thanks for having us on. And I have to say, I need to chill on this because it's like four coffees, not one.
Dude, this project has become like the ghost gym game journey. It's just like it's all we do is ghost and try to figure out the private world.
And we also turned it into a weight loss bet because we have no time to do anything but work. So that's in the mix right now, which is a
no,
whole nother.
maybe I could get in on that because I have no time also, but I find my time to get in the gym. That's calling you motherfuckers out a little bit. I know your lives are hard, but I'm in the gym 5 fucking times a week and I'm all over the place.
Good
So
for you, man. So yes, Stacks and everything else. How's it all connected? Probably best if we start with some context just on how we got here. The audience may know me from PD. That was our first project. For 7 years or so, we trained online players up to high stakes, backing them with data-driven strategies. That company did very well, 25 million in revenue over the first 8 years or so, and it got us to a point in 2022 where we started hearing a lot of the same patterns in recruitment consults, specifically from high stakes players. At that point, we had trained a couple of world class players. Oh Hey Cindy, which maybe you were even battling him back in the day on PokerStars.
oh yeah, I
Actually,
remember him a
that
bit.
was one of our first breakout players. There was Matt Marinelli in 2022, who really took off, and he became America's number one. Guys who had taken the system all the way up to high six, maybe even seven figures. Not sure of their exact numbers, but these high stakes players would come to us in these consults and say, "We saw what you did with them. We're interested. Can you do this for us?" And so we would say, "So here's the system. This is what those guys used." And then we would say they also had relentless effort that they applied to this. When you get to that point in the conversation, you see guys start to squirm because they start to realize, well, this is possible, but there's not going to be a life balance if I go for this. Not really. At least we couldn't provide one. We knew what it took. We saw these guys train. And so for us, it was just honestly, it's going to be extreme if you do it. And they would start to say, okay, so what else do you got? Do you have anything else that we could do to get there potentially? And it bothered us that we didn't really have an answer for these guys. We felt like we were turning a lot of potential away for people who didn't want to give up their whole lives to get to the seven-figure point. So that was what prompted us to start asking the question of like, where is the money? Is there actually a real path to seven figures, or are we at a clear ceiling in poker? You can look at Smart Hand. There's only 5 guys a year really doing 1 million on publicly tracked sites, at least. It starts to raise the question of, is it even possible? Even if these guys did work really hard, could all of them make seven figures, or is there just not enough money in the market to make that a reality? So that is where we decided it's time to start exploring if there is low-hanging fruit that we're missing. And so that's where I started to basically make the transition to private in search of where the money was. And that's where I met Paul.
Yeah, Nick and I sort of entered the space at a similar time. I was coming off a big tournament score, and I'm not as much from the online background. My whole world was live tournaments, live MTTs. But I was getting close to those guys that were at the top, like Foxon and I were friends, and some of the others, and I saw what the type of work they were putting in, and it led me to a similar place. I wanted to find where the low hanging fruit was also. Where's the money in poker? Because it can't just be these MTTs that take, years of pressing out variants and training and all of these things. Like there's still got to be money in the space. Yeah, I mean, so I think that's how Nick and I initially bonded was we were in these big battles every day and we started going out after games and talking and we got to this point where like, hey man, this is where the money is. Like it was a realization simultaneously and we wanted to figure out ways to um make sure that the dream didn't end, I think.
And you can speak to this too. I mean, guys who don't know, specifically online guys, like private is a whole nother universe just in terms of stakes. I don't think online guys actually understand how big it plays. Just to put it in perspective for them, if you're playing 50-100 private, that session can quickly balloon into 200 and 400.
Hmm.
And I don't think online guys are prepared for even how that works or how that happens. But that would be the equivalent of like you sitting down at a 2K and L.
Hmm.
And then in the same session, that table turns into 10K and L. How does that happen?
Well, firstly, it happens, of course, because people never really want to play small. They want to chase losses, and they want to like straddle. And, oh, let's play the Squid Game or whatever. Um, I think going back to your point of finding where that money is at, that's one thing I tell people a lot when it comes to the actual making money part of poker. It's not the end all be all because at some level you have to improve your skill set. If you suck, your skill is like your magnifier of sorts. Like how good you are, it magnifies up to a point of magnifying your ability to make money. There are diminishing returns of sorts, but if you're trying to make real money, you have to look for where the opportunity is, where people are not looking, and you have to think, okay, what is it that I can do? Okay, some people get lucky, whatever, but what is it that I can do to get in these situations that other people are not getting into? If you can position yourself in one of these games, this is one of the biggest ways to earn something special. If you can find these games in the first place, and if you can figure out a way to get in, if you ask yourself, okay, how do you get in? And what are all the things you can do to prove yourself to get in? Like that will set you very far apart compared to a lot of other players who aren't thinking on this kind of dimension.
I think I think
100%.
I think Nick and I sort of did that initially by just going out a lot. Like that's how we established our presence in the space was we were just like the guys that were going to take everybody out and it became kind of this dream lifestyle where we were almost like royalty. We would play all day, drink at the table, be eating like the nicest restaurants in Vegas and then if the game broke early, we're going out to a club or whatever else. If not, we're at one of the nicest properties in Vegas till 2 in the morning. And it's this dream life that you didn't even think was possible when you're, traveling for me, traveling the circuit, playing tournaments, playing these like $1,500 buy-ins, or Nick from the online background. You don't see that world until you're there. And all of a sudden you become like a king.
I think it was just that we got sucked into that lifestyle for a little while. Like for the first 3 months, I could say honestly that we were in party mode. And I think we can all say that like you can get wrapped up in it. At the time, like I had forgotten almost why I went into it to begin with. I was trying to solve this problem of like, where is the money? We found it. And also it came with all these other temptations.
Hmm.
And so it became sort of this battle of who's more passionate about playing was like, because like he said, man, like God forbid the game breaks early. It's dinner, bar, club, and then you have restart at 1 p.m. the next day.
Hmm.
So there comes a point where you just have to like, for me, it was around like 3 months or so where I think we looked at each other and were like, is this really sustainable? Like, I think I'd gained like 15 pounds and I was drinking heavier than I'd drank in like years.
Yeah.
But we were also just doing really well. And like, or it appeared because it's just such a large opportunity vehicle. It got to the point where we sort of had to look at each other and be like, is this sustainable? Not sure, but we're having a great time.
And I hope it doesn't stop. And then all of a sudden, the word got out how much money Nick was up, and the dream quickly went away. Nick started losing access. I don't know if you want to touch on that, Nick, but yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of like a bubble, I guess. We were out one night, drunk, I think, and some of the pros were asking, who's up. I made the mistake. Who knows if it's a mistake? I mean, I'd probably say it again, but I was just transparent. Like, I'm up this much. And a lot of the pros were shocked to hear that. I think a lot of people thought I was down. In these games, nobody's really tracking, or if they are, it can get skewed by how much action there actually is. So that started to leak that I was up a bunch. And that's when the politics started to creep in. At the time, there were not clear systems for how to get in unless you were bringing VIPs.
Mhm.
So the politics that develop without those systems is a lot of access becomes subjective. Game runners start to make judgment calls, maybe sometimes based on, is this guy up a bunch this week? Maybe I'll give the seat to the other pro who's buried this week,
Obnoxious, but yeah, I
which
mean,
is understandable from the standpoint of all the pros in the network are friends.
mhm,
But it wasn't satisfying from a procedural standpoint.
sure.
So that's what we were really looking for. And I guess what happened at that time was I knew my seat was in jeopardy. I started to feel like there was no clear system for me to follow to secure my seat again. And I created a self-fulfilling prophecy in my head, which was I'm just going to maximize whatever seats I have left because I think I'm on my way out. And this is something that in retrospect, I probably could have helped myself if I took a different path, but I wasn't aware of what it was at the time. In my head, it was just like, I don't know how to fix this. I'm just going to let it run its course. And I could think you can attest that like I was not fun to play with around that time.
The biggest shocking thing to me was I didn't realize you were that good at poker, to be honest. Like, like we were playing and all of a sudden, like Nick had it in all the big pots. And I was like, whoa, man, like what's going on? But yeah, no, I think I get why you felt like that was the best solution at the time. There just was no real process for what's going to determine how long this is going to, how long am I going to get access? And it became like this thing where there was a battle for the seats, and it was just a matter of making sure that when you did get a seat, I could see why you felt that it was
There was a lot of
necessary.
tension between the pros and the network at that point. I think everybody started to see this is shakier than we think. Um, and so with that extra time that was freed up from me not being in as many games anymore, I really started to lean into this idea of what if we could build systems that would give pros secure long-term access to these games? And what would that do for all the guys back on the other side of the bridge on the online side to fill this gap of maybe giving them a clear path of how to move over?
So I think this is a very interesting idea, and I believe it looks like it's possible. It looks like there is a way to make games sustainable and for there to be multiple different games. I mean, there may be I suspect there's going to have to be some level of patience to be had. I mean, it's just the nature of poker, like the opportunities, like especially if the line gets big enough for all these pros. But if collectively these pros are bringing the appropriate amount of value and doing things in such a smart way that VIPs want to keep coming back, and they're thinking, okay, we have a good experience, and we're connecting with other people, we're learning. There may be a way that we can create a greater than zero sum situation where pros can get wealthier and make more connections with businessmen, and there can be long-term sustainability for these private cash games in an organized fashion where there's no bullshit, everything's above board.
Yeah.
Um, the VIPs, recreational players, have a good experience. They're being taken care of, taken out, whatever it is, and the pros also get to make quite a bit of money.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there, when you said prioritizing the recreationals experience.
Mhm.
We sort of reached this uh, loop that we were in, and we couldn't figure out, like you were saying, what was going to be the thing that we could build everything off of,
Mhm.
Uh,
to determine
yeah.
the systems that need to be put in place, so that, like you said, there could be a fluid system where if everybody's working together, the recreationals experience is better. There's more games.
I'm curious about how you're going to solve this. Also, I know some of the things. The easiest thing I always say to make like the smoothest thing that you can do for recreationals is be kind and have their best intentions at heart. Like, I always say that personally.
Soft skills, 100%.
But, I mean, there's harder soft skills to have, like
True.
being smooth and taking and being funny or whatever. That's a tougher one, right? And then but I'm curious what your approach is to all that.
Well, I think I come from it pretty scientifically, at least designing systems to track who is good for the game.
Mhm.
I came from a world where we solved things through protocols. I mean, that was what online was for us. Scaling that business was spot the protocol, then spot the pattern, apply them in sync, get the result. And so when things don't make sense systematically, it bothers me,
Sure.
like on a deep level. And now I had a personal reason to solve this system because
Yeah.
it just cost me my access. So I think, yes, you're right that we were making a bet that we could solve it. That was the first bet. We would not accept that a system couldn't be designed. And I think it was that intensity that kept us trying to strip this thing down to first principles and be like, what would be the thing that, if it were true, aligns the interest of every single type of player in this game? Game runner, pro, recreational.
You know, Nick has this mode he gets in sometimes. Like, I've grown really close to him over the last 2 years, and I'll never forget that morning. I get a text from him. I had just been playing all night, and I probably got 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and I wake up, and Nick's like, "Dude, what are we trying to do?" And I knew what he meant, and I knew it meant I needed to wake up fast because we're about to get to a lot of work, and it ended up being simpler than we thought.
Yeah, this is my prompt that anyone close to me, you can ask my wife. She gets this one a lot. If I say, what are we trying to do? It means I am dead serious about solving this issue right now. And we're going to zoom out and reestablish what is the problem we're trying to solve. So that was the morning where I felt like I got to just get some altitude here. We've been deep in the weeds trying to figure out what the system should look like.
Mhm.
And so I asked Paul, and I think he was like probably on the tail end of like a 30-hour session or something. And he wakes up to this text and he says to me, we're trying to build a fair procedure for access that eliminates politics. He was sure of this. And I was like, yes, that's based. That's what we're trying to do. And then I said, okay, so then what is the one thing that game runners, pros, and recreationals all need the most? 10 seconds, he responds, great games. I say, okay, even deeper though. And he says, great games that last. And I said, okay, yes. How do we do that? Paul says, we make sure that recreationals want to come back. I said, then that's what we solve for. That conversation, and we'll throw it up on the screen at some point, but it was what formed the first internal thesis for Stacks. And it sparked the next phase of the journey, which relied a lot on Paul at that point because he was the only one left in the game.
I think it kind of what we realized too is the answer was in front of us the whole time.
Mhm.
You know, these recs and us were going out a lot, these recreational players. And they would tell us all of their different complaints. They would tell us who they liked in the game, who they didn't like in the game, why. And we compiled all of this information, and it helped us come together and build a real filter, which was, like you said, does this guy make the game better for the recreational player? And if he does, he can stay. If he doesn't, then he's not going to have as much access. And uh, on the surface, I know that can seem political, but when you break it down, it's actually procedural because
Well,
it's the blueprint for how to train a guy to be better for the game.
well, I mean, if we really get to the end point of that, to be like the way politics should be run is it should be in some ways procedural. Like it shouldn't be so arbitrary and like based off of what feels right in the moment. You really want to get down to the logic of it anyway.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, like the more value someone brings, the more access they should have. That's the fair way of doing things.
It was defining what value was, though.
Yes.
That was the first principle we couldn't strip down to. And when we decided, it's does the recreational enjoy playing with you? That made everything easier.
But even let me ask you something. So there's different kinds of value that someone can provide, and you can even provide value from outside of the game, so that recreationals feel okay. Like I like playing with this guy. This for me personally was when I started to, as like a tangent, decide to wonder what really is the game. But what I have to ask you guys is, how did you ever break down these different forms of value that people could provide? Because obviously there's taking them out to clubs. That's one form of value. There's being kind is a little bit form of value. It's the easiest one. Like I said, we know that. It's also being action. What does that even look like?
Sure.
I'm just curious what your model for all of this is. Being funny. I don't know how much value that is, but there's some value to that. I mean, maybe I'm trying to think. Maybe being the person who organized it has some value.
So we formed this assessment system, and I don't know, Nick, do you want to walk them through what exactly that looked like? Because we figured instead of it being um, something that one person needed to decide on every day, if we could figure out a collective way to determine if somebody brought all of those different factors, then there would be a clear procedural way to assess it without it being subjective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the objectivity that we were really searching for, but we needed the first principle in order to start to create an objective system. So arriving at that idea that we need to find a way to measure what's good for the game.
So what are those things as examples to measure?
So I think you could break them into dimensions. I think you could talk about the soft skill level, which is the pro's ability to banter and
That's the
build
humor.
rapport at the game in a way.
I think it's
that
really
is-
like a home game feel that you're searching for there.
home game vibes is probably the number one piece of feedback from recreationals. That's out of the recreationals' mouth. That's what they want.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So it got really interesting. I was talking to some other guys recently that like the way we started to message what we were building evolved as we were in more conversations with recreationals because they would put words in our mouths where we wouldn't have used that term before to express that thing. Like, I'll give you another one. The number one thing they don't like is tight, boring games.
Okay.
We tested tons of messaging on social media for that one, and that was actually the top performer for recreational players being engaged by that message. They don't want any more of that. When you break that down, what does that mean? Well, they don't want tight prose, and they want the vibes.
Sure.
That's what they mean when they say, I don't want it to be boring.
I think it's more than just not wanting tight pros. It's they want action, and they don't really care where it comes from. They just want to be in big pots. They want to know if they lose a pot that there's a possibility for them to get their money back, and we could build.
They want to see bluffs actually as what it turns out to be a good thing, as what one person said, because that was surprising to me. I thought someone didn't want to know that they got bluffed, but actually, the way it was Brazil got that to this, he said that if they could see that they could win the pot, if all they did was click call, they could win the pot. And apparently, so throwing some bluffs in there is actually a good thing.
Yeah. So once we determined that we had a formula to build this assessment system and really be fair about determining who did these different things better, it led us to building, the foundation for stacks, which really is, like, as we alluded to earlier, a two-sided coin, because it's not only can we guarantee that we create a good experience for the recreational, but we can also start to build a path so that if you are a pro and you come up through the Poker Dominion route, you have a clear lane to get there.
I personally want to know more on the details of some more examples of the value system. I don't know how much you can share of that. Like, what is it that makes one pro? I mean, I think you have a scale for VIPs too, but what is it that makes one pro worth more than others? What precisely? Like, how do you rate banter, for example? If you can rate it at all, maybe you even have a scale for banter game, even though, like, I'm sure there's like some level of some smaller levels of subjectivity somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can never get fully away from subjectivity, but you can triangulate reports and look for facts instead of opinions. Like,
For sure.
if a VIP was like, I did not like losing that pot to that guy.
Yeah.
Well, that's not going to ding a pro's experience score. But if they say, I didn't like the way he talked to me after I lost that pot, it felt like either he was bragging or he just wasn't a humble loser, that will ding your experience score. So that's a cool distinction, like, right off the bat. And there's a lot of stuff like that that goes on.
I can give you a little, like, I'll give you the first question we asked. We just say on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being a robot, 10 being Alan Keating, like, where do you rate this guy? And that's how we start the conversation. And because there's this transparency and trust between us and the game runners we work with, we're able to get access to everybody that the player played with that day and get every opinion, the pro, the game runner, and the recreational, so that it's not just about does the game runner like you or does the rec like you? It's about are you contributing to the overall experience, which I think is big to be fair, you know.
I get that. I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to like hear more about how what are these precise ways? This is probably what the viewers are thinking like,
Sure.
okay, I get that. Now, how do I actually do that? One personal advice that I would give to people that helped me a lot and was one of the cheapest ways of self-improvement. I've advised this a bunch of times is improv because that's one of the ways you build your banter skills. I personally just try to make jokes all the time and because I want to have a good time and I'm like sitting there and that helps me to make have my jokes land a little bit more and slowly improves the humor skill as one example of like actionable steps to get to this point and then like what it would be actionable steps to be more action like 3-bet like 20% more than what GTO says like that.
There's definitely two dimensions. We could say there's like the tactical dimension,
Yeah.
and then there's the soft skill dimension, which is more of just like the social side. I think the tactical dimension goes super deep. We've seen stuff that, unless we were in hands and analyzing them after and being like, was this an opportunity where you could have given a lot more action and not even sacrificed much EV? Like,
Well,
those are
there's
spots
also
that like pros need to be studying if they want to be good.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've probably found a bunch of those.
Yes, I have. I mean, I've been experimenting with a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of things. There's a lot more depth to poker. Like this is the stuff that I'd like to teach in the mastermind and get on lockdown. Like, okay, how do you do things that are a lot more action, a lot more interesting, that don't really sacrifice EV, maybe a little bit of EV, but not too much. That make it more fun for everybody and make it pushes even your game and even like helps you
Yeah.
with your game and get you in the game and get you to be making more money
From a
in the long run.
strategy perspective, the way a player needs to be thinking about designing strategy definitely shifts at the private level
Mhm.
in the direction of what you're saying. You got to be looking through a lens of how much EV do I sacrifice by taking this action oriented play relative to just doing what I would do if I was trying to maximize edge straightforward in a live environment.
Sure.
So that's dimension one. And I think it goes really deep to the point where like
Yeah.
we're creating entire modules on tactical calibration that is good for the game.
Yeah. To
Okay.
give some examples, like I mean, one really obvious example is just three betting more with a little bit wider range with hands that are like a pip or two away. Like that seems like fairly obvious, but some other examples would be to incorporate more check raises. I wonder if overbets are better on the whole. You can also incorporate some leads. You can or incorporate looser calling ranges in a lot of spots too. Do just like weird creative things that spice up the game a bit.
A lot of weird creative stuff, especially if it's a game that's playing with bounties and some of the carnival games like Squid provides a lot of opportunities to do things that look pretty crazy but are actually pretty sharp.
Mhm.
And the advantage of that is that it creates a great experience. Like, I think that's why games like Squid, if you're with the right group who really loves action, I mean, there are some recreationals who prefer not to play it, but there's nothing that drives action better than that game. Very few things that I can think of, at least. So it creates these opportunities for you to explore a lot of new pathways through which we can design strategy that just don't exist in traditional environments.
Sure.
And then to speak to the other side of the coin, once you're giving immense amounts of action, I think it just comes down to not being rude. Like as long as you're polite and you can have some banter, some conversation. If you're giving a ton of action, the guy's going to enjoy playing with you. As long as you don't do anything absurd like insult him or storm or make a scene when you lose a pot, something like that where there could be tension. I think
What
that
was the
the
thing that
second
they
kind of
said?
the second side of the coin becomes very easy once you've mastered the action side, at least for us.
The thing that they said in the consults a lot that we ended up tracking the pattern. It was something along the lines of, we don't care if we lose to that guy because we know
That if I lose a pot to him, I can win it back the very next hand. Is
it was
basically
yeah,
it was
his
basically
money's going to be right back in action next hand.
yeah.
Like, that was something that came up a lot, and then we saw that we're like, okay, so that's how the recreational experiences and internalizes an action pro. His money is right back in action. The opposite of that would be the pro who doesn't play any hands, and then in a big pot he stacks them with aces, and they think they're going to need a miracle to get it back from him.
Sure.
Okay, so
Yeah, I like that you're getting direct feedback from the VIPs and like actually trying to you care about how they're feeling
I
and
mean, that
what they're looking for.
they're a huge part of the decision of who's good for the game. They might be the heart of the decision. But then you also go to the other pros and the game runners, and you get the full spectrum report.
Because a lot of times, not to insult a recreational, but they might not be able to pinpoint exactly what it was that they loved about a guy. They just knew that they loved playing with him, and then that's why it's good to get the feedback from these other, individuals that were in the game that might be more aware of specific things that the person did, and then we can
Sure.
track a lot of that. And to go back to your question, I mean, that's how we're building these systems. Is we're just tracking all of the good behaviors, all of the behaviors that VIPs want to see again and again, and all the things that they dislike immensely. And what we can do from there is build these systems to be very fair, very transparent, and repeatable. As long as you can have repeatable things, you can build great games for a long time because you can teach somebody this is how you do this. This is what you need to do. Keep doing it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And
That actually is how the distinction gets created between what we do at PD and what we do at Stacks now. Stacks is our lineup protection system that upholds the recreational's standard for game quality. It is the private agency that does all of these assessment reports and organizes lineups. Poker Dominion is the pro division of Stacks. That's where we train, evaluate, and level up the pros to take them into private where they can multiply their online winnings.
Mhm.
That's how they click together. And those were the two builds that came from arriving at this one principle, which was basically, how are we going to get a clear path of access for pros to get into these games and make sure they're good for the game? Right off the bat, what pros, specifically online guys, don't understand sometimes is that your first impression means a lot. So if it's your first time at a private game, you should be walking in, introducing yourself to the game runner and every player at the table. And if you're a regular in the game, I mean, I think it's best practice to stand up from your seat and introduce yourself to every VIP who arrives at the game. This single thing, it's like what people say about if you just remember somebody's name, which is a big part of this too. Like, it's just, there are these principles that if you do them every time, you will stand out in a way that someone begins to positively associate you in the game. So that would be like the simplest that I could offer. But
I also would like to speak on just like there's massive red flags that you can do to immediately signal that you're out of place. Something like three betting to the precise right sizing and using like the $25 chips, making it 1,075. That's a red flag, dude. That's gonna get you immediately on everybody's shit list.
Yeah.
Like, and we've compiled all of this stuff. Nick, you want to tell them what we're gonna do for everybody?
The big mistakes are what people need to understand first, because if you can avoid the big mistakes, you can have a future here. And so what we did, from being in closed door conversations with some of the top game runners over the last 2 years in Vegas, we wrote down the discussions that ended some careers for pros. And we wrote down the stuff that locked some pros in with secure seat access. And we looked at all that data and we compiled it all into what we're calling the Private Poker Access Playbook. This is the first offering that we wanted to give the pro community as a symbol of what's possible now that fair access is open.
Because at this level, one invite can change your life, and you need to be ready for it. Dan, I was watching, I think a couple weeks ago, you came out with a video that sort of talked about breaking into private.
Mhm.
And I'd like to hear, if you have any pointers that from your experience breaking into the scene.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just, I heard you telling a story on there that seemed interesting. It seemed like you went about
just
breaking into it in like a different way that wasn't exactly traditional.
Yeah, so I was just thinking of that. And by the way, yeah, the name memorization thing, that's something I feel I can personally improve on. That's actually probably, I wonder how much equity that truly gives you.
More than it should in theory.
Oh, really? Okay. I wonder how much that one's been fucking me. But I love this because it also actually teaches people life skills to be like good people. It's like teaching people elements of charisma.
Mhm.
And like now this is a graceful transition into all kinds of greater than zero sum possibilities, such as if like the VIP likes you enough, like maybe there's even a business opportunity there. Like he introduces to you to some friends or whatever.
100%.
And one of the areas to be touched on, which is what I personally was very intrigued by, was like the possibility of other influences getting you into the game. There are other ways to play to like even if you're not perfect or whatever, there's other ways of getting into things. So I have a bit of a story and it starts a little bit earlier than actually asking to get into the game. I can just tell you guys how I got into a game that absolutely changed my life. So, once upon a time, I was reading this guy's blog who I admired because he had such a big network. He's very well connected in LA, and like this girl I was seeing liked him too. Uh, and I was intrigued by this guy. I was like, he's so extrovert or whatever. Um, Extrovertism was always good, but in this case, he was well connected, and so he wrote a blog about how he was meeting this old lady and how he ended up becoming successful. And this old lady just needed $25,000, but had a fantastic reputation, and she just needed it for some emergency. And so he decided to empty out his bank account, loan this lady money. But one caveat: this lady's credit was 100%. That's important. So you guys don't loan money to VIPs and get fucked. I made that mistake too. In some bizarre way. So,
Small caveat.
yeah. So what happened was this lady was so grateful that she introduced him to all her friends. And even though like this seemed like a risky move to take, it would have been risky if she would have screwed him over. She was never screwing him over. And by just helping out this person in a big way, in a very sharp way, this opened up so many doors for this guy. And he said that was like one of the best decisions he ever made. And so along those lines, something a bit similar happened. There was a game for me. So there was a poker game that was notoriously good. It was this game in Asia in Manila with Paul Fua and this group. And, you know, they're playing with chairman and playing enormous games, $1 million+ games. And at I couldn't figure out how to get in. So all I did was just ask Paul, like, hey, what do I need to do to play? How do I bring value to the situation?
Mm.
And he actually gave me an opportunity straight away. He said, okay, well, we need a little bit of cash. Can you lend us some cash? Paul's good for money. He's not going to fuck me over. I didn't have any at the time, so I couldn't do that. That's one way of doing things. If you know the person's not going to fuck you over, that's important. um, but anyway, that would have been one like intro in there. And even if like it didn't get me into the games, it would have been like a favor in the right direction. Doing people favors is ultimately long term greater than zero sum. Uh, and then what happened later was him and his group had some issues with the FBI about some what seemed to be unfair sports betting situations. And the FBI required somebody from the US to post bail. And so I looked into it. I talked to a lawyer to make sure everything was safe. And they basically said, yeah, you're 100% to get it back. And then people will always pay. I made sure the other person of the group would always pay. I'm not supposed to say who he is. But I ended up posting bail for one of the people in that group. And I got even a message about how grateful they were, and they're for sure going to return the favor. And sure enough, because of this, I got an access into this game. 200, it was something like bigger than 200, 400 plus no limit. And it was like quite a soft game. And then eventually I got to play it with chairman. Um, it ends up turning into a longer story, but and I was not perfect at all. I had all kinds of flaws. I was obnoxious to play with, and I had to work on that. I even played a little bit slow, like all this stupid shit. And so I fixed all this gradually, and it turned out like a lot of people were just nice to me because for some reason, and partly because I did this favor, and that will help even if you have like some issues that you haven't totally resolved. But you definitely want to, if you do have those issues, you need to get rid of them. So there's that. You can fucking change. That's a big point. Believe me, change is possible. You have to make the intention. There's a few different ways to do it, especially like talk to yourself or whatever before you go into a game to be on your best behavior because it absolutely matters. And
I think there's a lot of like 20 somethings that are just afraid to have that initial conversation, like the what do I need to do to get in this game, or and it leads to them just never doing it, and they end up
Yeah.
trying to stay in their comfort zone. And like you alluded to, that caps you so much from your development, not only as a poker player, but in the real world,
It does, totally. Like, that's the fastest way to know the truth. Just ask what the truth is. Uh, and to ask, like, what's some way to give value? And, plenty of people that have loads of assets or whatever, there's something that they don't have, and there might be some kind of way to get in. And you have to think to yourself, okay, what's the way to get in? It's similar to when you're playing a poker strategy. You have to be playing someone in poker. You have to think to yourself, where's your edge coming from? Like, where is this EV? It's not in submitting the flop 100 fucking percent of the time because everybody's doing that. What are the people not doing that can be done?
Yeah, I think this playbook we built is kind of like the super system for guys. It's not going to give you the solver answers to every question, but it's kind of just going to give you the basics of the big things that you shouldn't do in order to
I
enter
think
the space.
I think it will give a lot in a direction where people haven't consciously applied. How do we actually solve this?
Yeah.
That's just kind of been fumbling in the dark and been thinking to themselves, okay, like there's a lot of various ways to hustle to get to seven figures. And this will be like opening a door to that where no one has ever really put effort into that.
I hope the problem that it solves is that for the first time, the nervousness and anxiety around making one big mistake no longer really has to be there for a player. I really feel like we've captured all of the biggest mistakes that we saw that caused access to be lost and drilled them down into first principles in this thing. And the reason I see that being valuable, especially for the logical, sharp online kid in his young 20s, is now there's a leniency for you. All you need to do is avoid these things, and we're behind you. We'll give you feedback. It's not going to be this black and white decision anymore once you have these things handled.
Mhm.
But if you don't know these big things, we can't save you. So like that's the first step.
For
and,
sure.
and that's what we really wanted to accomplish with this first build is like,
I think there's so much opportunity in private poker that's not being captured right now from every angle.
Oh, for
And
sure. But it's also on the game runner's side too. This
yeah,
is one thing I really want to talk about. But we should definitely talk. We talk with Nick about this.
yeah.
But go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, no, with all that opportunity, you don't just have to be some 20-something-year-old kid that studies GTO solvers all day. Like there's even more opportunity if you're an older pro that thinks the game might have passed him
that's
by
true. That's
to
true.
like to enter the space. Like that's what we did. We built this for the entire pro poker scene. It's not just the 20-something-year-old kid. There's also these guys 30s, 40s, 50s that are wondering what's next for them in poker. Are they capped?
The advantage for that guy is that his age helps him in private. He has more commonalities with the typical recreational player just because they're closer in age.
Mhm.
And I think that's important for those guys to hear is that like if you are creeping into your 40s and maybe you're an online guy or you play live and you haven't broken into private yet, this is a huge opportunity for you that probably doesn't exist in other industries where age can be an advantage in the sense that it helps you build commonalities with the people that actually matter in these games. Some of these young 20 somethings, they're not going to have as much in common with a recreational who's 50 years old. And I think it's important to address both of those groups and be like, for the 20 something guy, the fact that you're nervous is exactly why you need to tackle this right now because it will not get easier. And to be honest, look at the market. You have 20 somethings buying dating, coaching, and lifestyle help for tens of thousands of dollars. Here's an environment where you can get paid to go practice those skills. Like you're already here. You can leverage the game you already love to develop yourself in this way. Then for the guy who's in their 30s creeping into 40s, it's like you're considering leaving poker. This is your last chance potentially to make it big. And you have this positional advantage of being older. Use the frustration of potentially not having a way to seven figures in the game that you love to leverage that movement. I think it works for both sides. And I think if you're someone who is at a ceiling and you haven't considered private, I hope that what we've built with the playbook causes you to consider taking one more shot at it.
I do think there's a route for everybody to. There's a few different possibilities for people to succeed because the younger crowd tends to have the advantage of they should have the theory advantage is my guess, and then the older crowd has the advantage of like being able to relate with the recreational players a bit more and possibly take them out and like know what they're interested in and all that and play more of the soft skills side of things. Um, the younger crowd, yeah, just inevitably isn't gonna. The stereotype is that the younger crowd tends to, even among the women, they always say like, "Oh, these guys don't know how to treat a woman" and all this sort of shit. Uh,
That's a whole nother podcast.
yeah, that's a whole nother podcast. That's a podcast and a half. But yeah, and I'm just saying that I imagine that carries over a lot to these private games. I just think there's a high likelihood of these guys making various social faux pas. But then there's lots of value for them to learn, as you said.
Absolutely. And I
Um,
think that's the growth mindset that you got to come into it with. Intense anxiety that you're going to make a big mistake. Well, now there's a learning ground. And if there's a learning ground, then you can develop yourself in a way that's neutral or calm or progressive. That's why we built the playbook, because it stands as the thing that hopefully helps people calm down enough to just take the first step and be like, okay, I'm going to learn the things that I absolutely should never do. And from that point, I'm prepared at least to take my first step in.
mhm.
And then you can start to experience it and start to learn for yourself. And I hope that's what we accomplished with this first step. And we made it free because right now we care more than anything about getting guys to this point where they can actually take this jump. You're making 200, 300, $400,000 a year. You have tons of potential, and not to diminish your journey here, but from a financial standpoint, where you're at is very insignificant compared to where you could be if you could make a leap into private, into networking,
Mhm.
beyond exponential.
Mhm.
So it's not to diminish what you've done. It's just to show you there's a door now where if you care about your own evolution, you walk through this door. Because who knows how long it'll be open? Like hopefully private expands, but there will always be limited seats. And that is not politics. That's just scarcity.
I think the big thing too in the community is there's really a lack of knowledge of what goes on in the room. What's going on behind closed doors. Nick and I were there. We've been there. We know the conversations that were had that got guys to never get invited back ever again. And we put all of that in this playbook. And like Nick said, we made it totally free because we just want to help the community start to see that this is possible, that you can break into this new world and you can make seven figures in poker in 2025 realistically in a way that doesn't require you to be the top three players in the world. I think Nick, you have a lot of experience with that because didn't you sort of come back from that mindset?
I mean, I was one of the younger kids in my 20s that was aiming for the top. Uh, and I tried really hard, and I wanted to believe there was a way through, and there was. I mean, you're proof that there was, but there could only be 10 of you,
Yeah.
realistically.
Yeah. I mean, that's how being the best works. There's only so many
Nick, let's not
best.
get it wrong. There's only one jungle.
So
I
I
mean, come on.
failed. So I failed miserably, but
Well, I think yeah, that's a challenging path for sure. It's there's some hidden luck in it too, by the way. And so there's one bizarre way I got incredibly lucky. But yeah, I can think
fourth
of.
podcast, Jungle's.
We need a lot of ghosts. We need more ghosts. Somebody bring in ghosts.
But yeah, I mean, just bringing it back, it's like I was that kid. I really wanted there to be a path that was more clear and maybe a path that you could have more life balance with. That's been a goal that I wanted to accomplish for a while because I don't like telling guys that to get to seven figures, you can't have any type of life. I don't like
Yeah.
that. That bothers me. It doesn't feel like it should necessarily be that way, especially with how smart poker players are. Like, if these guys were applied in other areas, they already have a lot of the traits that would make them eight-figure players in other industries, not seven. So why?
Well, that's one of the things that I think this brings the doorway to, because once we start getting into the realm of networking and the realm of figuring out business, hello, many of your VIPs are fucking businessmen.
Hmm.
Like, uh, it's a bit tricky to get into business. That's been a route that I've been exploring. I think business is a lot harder than poker in certain ways. Like it's very open ended, and there's so many things that are subjective and all that. I'm sure that there's loads of businesses that fail too, but if we're talking something bigger, than if trying to get to 8 figures, that's going to be quite a challenge. But this is also potentially in the long run the doorway to all of that.
Yeah.
I
Um,
I think for me, like, being a 20 something that's played these games, like, the amount of mentors that I've been, able to access that I never would have been able to even walk up and have a conversation with has been life changing for me. Like I have guys now that have, you know, 8 figure, 9 figure, 10 figure net worths that are giving me advice. I could just text at any time and be like, "Hey, what do you think
okay.
about this?" Or "What do you think
Well, you
about
could.
that?"
This would be a decent opportunity to drop a few names, if any ring a bell.
I mean, I think Andrew Pacheco is probably one of the biggest mentors I have. Like I text Pacheco about everything when it comes to if I
See
consider
the Ethereum guy?
so Andrew was one of the biggest nightlife hosts in Vegas,
Yeah.
and he's transitioned now into hard money lending.
Oh, really?
So yeah, he has like this big hard money lending business in Vegas.
Shout out Andrew Pacheco.
Yeah, shout out Pacheco.
I think what's weird is that you can have people with that net worth in your phone as a poker player that you would never have met in any other. There's no way your path would have crossed with that person
Nick, you should
if you
tell the
didn't play
story
We should
about
poker.
get into business
yeah,
or
you should tell the story
really
about the
just try to
billionaire
be
that
stock.
you met at the Win. Remember that?
I mean, there was this one session. It wasn't even that big of a session, and it was a 5K buy-in game. And I played all day. I lost some pots to this older man who was just like a happy-go-lucky tourist. We were at across from each other that day, so I didn't talk to him much, but we were bantering. And next day, he shows up at the game, and I'm there first, and I'm there with him, and we're chatting about some of the hands from yesterday. He decimated me the day before. I mean, for that game, he just won every pot. And so the day goes on, and like there's a lull in the session at one point where like a big pot gets shipped towards a player and no one's talking. And this guy just pipes up and he's like, "Those chips are the same color as my jet." Now he hasn't said anything remotely indicating that he's wealthy up to this point. I'm just like, huh? And so then I catch his name on his player's card and I Google him. Turns out he's one of the wealthiest in the world, like top 100 SpaceX type level.
Oh, wow.
And I had no clue because he carried himself in such a humble way. But we started
Like a
talking more that day
jackpot.
about just traveling, some of his homes. And at one point he hands me his phone and he's like, "Here, look at my houses over here." And now he's in a pot and I'm holding his phone and I'm like swiping through this guy's phone. And in my head, I'm like, this is one of the most powerful men in the world. And he's just giving me his phone. I'm like, what else is at my fingertips right now? And it's just, there's no other, there's no logical reason why I should have this billionaire's phone in my hand, yet somehow I do. And it's poker that brought us together.
Well, that just shows the power of poker. This is one of the reasons why I decided to empower it, because only through things like this can people who have, like, to be successful at poker, you need some level of inner virtue, like discipline, working hard, whatever it is. You have to be smart with money, and only through, well, it's a pretty good avenue anyway. The only through poker or like business, pretty much, are the only ways that you can now intermingle with such people relatively easily.
That was one of the first conversations you and I really jammed on, I think, was like, what if there would be a way to really enhance and elevate the network potential for pros? I think that was the thing that we saw as worth building from the start
Mhm.
because we came from it and the path is extremely valuable if built properly, if built in a way where it can be walked with like clarity. And I think that's what creates the barrier. It's just not clear yet to people.
Well, it's that's one of the barriers for sure. But clarity, getting meaning, clarity in my mind, get meaning means getting really analytical, like the details that matter, and like the structure, as you said. That's one of
Mhm.
the things that I liked about your approach. Is you seemed quite structured in how you do things, as if you had some background in business. This is one of the things that business people are quite good at, that poker people are not so good at.
Yeah.
So they, if they're successful at business, a successful business does have structure to it. In addition, I think one of the barriers is a lot of people just don't see the long term, man. It goes back to the game runners. that think, oh, we got to charge high rake and just fuck everyone over so we can make a quick buck. And this is just bad for poker. It's bad for everybody. And then nobody win. I mean, maybe even like their game quits or they get a bad reputation. But I think the more people work together in some form of way and see this big picture and say, okay, what can we all bring to the table and do in a coordinated way
Yeah.
to make this reality happen?
It's so interesting what you can learn from just elevating your network. And we starting with this playbook. We're starting to put all these lessons down, and there's going to be a lot more free resources that we put out there because we just want poker players to know that there's a path to bigger things.
The playbook is just the first steps to get you in the door and get you acquainted with how this all works. And then we're bringing it to life right before the WSOP. Dan's coming out right after Triton, flying straight from Montenegro, Vegas, May 31st, June 1st. It's a 2-day event. We're bringing Elliot Rowe in. We're going deeper on all the modules that we went into here in terms of game experience, debuting top level strategy content. We're even giving away real private access to guys who come to that mastermind at WSOP that series. So if you come to WSOP, this is the place where you can get actual private access while you're in Vegas. Come to the mastermind, come check us out. And I think personally, a lot of new friendships are going to be forged at this event because there are two types of poker players in my eyes right now. There are the guys that are ready to jump onto this path, and there's everyone else. And I think it's that big of a gap that there will be a clear separation in the community moving forward. And not in a bad way. It's just like, this is the potential that's now available because there's an open access point. So,
And I think I can't stress it enough. We said it earlier. One invite can change your life. It changed mine. It changed Nick's. Dan, I think you said earlier one invite changed your life as well. And this could be that invite for you. You come to this mastermind, who knows the possibilities? You're going to get real access, a real path to the private world.
And one way of looking at it is asymmetric risk. You risk like some amount of money, and then who knows what doors that opens to possibilities like far beyond that amount of money, or just.
I mean, you had to risk $1 million posting the guy's bail. I mean, this is
that was actually the most creative way to gain access I think I've ever heard.
Really?
Yeah. Props for that.
Oh, spicy. Yeah, spicy.
Do you have a better one?
Let me think if I have some other ones.
Podcast 5. Yeah, I think we've talked about a lot from a lot of different angles in terms of private and the bridge. For the three of us, I think we could say the big shared goal is clear. It's create a path that helps online pros get to the next level, break the 6-figure ceiling, and expand their network. We came from that world. He kind of came from that world on the tournament side, at least. Now we are sort of building what we wish we had, which was just a clear bridge, a safe bridge, I think. And maybe if there's one thing I can leave guys with, it would be this, is that in 2025, as a high stakes pro, especially online pro, I totally get that you're obsessed with strategy and always looking for the next edge. But right now, at present, the real strategy to get to the next level is access. It's networking. It is exponentially more important than any upgrade you could make to your win rate online.
And there's diminishing returns to these win rates. You just like burrow down a hole of like, okay, how do I make sure I'm exploiting my opponent with my perfect c-bet range and all, or my river c-bet range? Like, there's, if you're thinking in terms of money or life experience, is there really all that much there?
Not once you're already as good as these guys are. That's the thing. It's time to just explode. So we built you guys this bridge. I mean, you'll be able to pick up the free guide underneath the YouTube video when it drops. Check out our socials, Poker Dominion on Instagram, Stacks.poker on Instagram too. All I can really say is, Dan, thanks for supporting the project, because there's not many people with a platform as big as yours that we've come across who are as passionate about moving the ball forward in this way. So,
well, thank you. Well, I'm about moving the poker and ideally all of us towards a bigger picture, a greater reality for all of us. I believe it's possible.
I'm looking forward to spending more time with you, and thanks to Paul for being such a big part of the founders part of this project.
I'm excited just to help guys my age, to create a future for 20 somethings in poker that extends into this private scene and beyond. It's gonna be fun.
One last thing, shout out to, the Table 1 guys too. Those were the game runners who really inspired us to go in this direction. Honestly, 2 of the nicest guys I've ever met, and, this is Art and Justin from, Table 1 Vegas. You can check out their Instagram. It was important for us to start this project with guys who we really trusted and felt good about. So I just want to acknowledge those guys for making this possible because after I got my access taken away, that could have went a lot of ways if these guys weren't so reasonable and genuine as people. So that's my last shout out. I appreciate you again, man, for putting us on, and I really am looking forward to developing this thing more in May with whoever comes to see us at the mastermind.
Me too. And I like to give a couple shout outs as well. Shout out to Phenom Poker because they truly want to build poker and make poker a better place for everybody, as well as Rake that's beatable. That's important as well because if we take too much fucking Rake, there's no more Dream. That's important. The players still have a stake in poker existing too. The actual want to be pros. The Dream has to stay alive. God damn it. And also AA Poker to making poker a reality in China. It really looks like it's going to happen. It looks like there's going to be tournaments in China. That'll be really exciting for all kinds of reasons. You guys are going to be blown the fuck away by China.
Paul will be there.
I am in.
Yeah, like, dude, some of the nicest, maybe the nicest, like the top 5 fucking nicest cities.
I'm sure he was gonna say tits.
I really thought we were going that direction
Well,
too.
the thing is, I'm not into Chinese women. That's just not my. They're just not my preference. I have a type. AA Poker is making the dream alive too. The whole slogan is anyone can be a star, and they don't even charge rake. Actually, they make money through what is it? Like you have to pay for like the showing the cards or
No, I didn't know that.
yeah, that's
Oh,
the.
wow.
It also is anti-cheating. So and to use
Taxes.
time banks.
Taxes.
Yeah, but we need beatable games. We need beatable games. We need happy VIPs. We need people to be kind on the whole and be thinking about the bigger picture.
Appreciate you, Dan. Thanks so much.